Daf Yomi, tractate Bava Batra, page 87a, top of the page. Pei Zion, Amud Aleph, with the words Vilagoren Yafes Selah. Asur lihanos himenu aval im sichara behayom dinar liyom Vilagoren Yafes Selah mutar. A day of a laborer's work during the harvest is worth a selah, the equivalent of 4 silver dinars for each day. It is prohibited to derive benefit from him, meaning one may not employ the laborer under these conditions. The reason is that this is akin to taking interest, as the laborer works and receives less than he is entitled to in exchange for early payment. But if one hires him already from now to work for 1 dinar a day for an extended period of time, including the harvest season, and the work of a laborer during the harvest is worth a selah, this is permitted. Kor b'shloshim sava selah ani mocher lach rishon kana hachanami kama mifsak pesak v'asor lehanos mimenu Dinar liyom velagoren yafes selah mutar amai v'ha'agar natar lihu. And if it enters your mind, as Rav and Shmuel claim, that if a seller said, "I am selling you 1 kor for 30 selah, each se'ah for 1 selah," he cannot fully renege on the sale in the middle of the transaction, as the buyer acquires each se'ah 1 by 1 as it is measured. Then the halacha in this case should be different. Here too, as he does not agree to 1 large sum but fixes a price for each day. 1 by 1 is akin to taking interest, as the laborer works and receives less than he is entitled to in exchange for early payment, and therefore it should be prohibited to derive benefit from him. Whereas the Batra states, if one hires him from now to work for 1 dinar a day over an extended period of time, including the harvest, and 1 day of a laborer's work during the harvest is worth 1 selah, this is permitted. Why is it permitted? But isn't it payment for waiting? Meaning for advancing the money to the laborer? Amar Rava. Rava said, but it's rough. And how can you understand the Batra in that manner? Zalzali b'schirus mi'asir. Ma'ishna reisha, ma'ishna seifa. Rava said, how can you understand the Batra in that manner? Is it prohibited for one to lower his hiring price and receive lower wages in order to ensure that he is employed? This arrangement is not a form of interest and violates no prohibition. The Gemara asks, if this is not considered taking interest, then what is different in the first clause, where the laborer is not employed immediately and this arrangement is prohibited? And what is different in the latter clause where it is permitted? Reisha de la ka'avi b'hadei mehashta mechsi ki agar natarli seifa de ka'avid b'hadei mehashta lo michazei ki agar natarli. The Gemara explains, in the first clause, as the laborer does not work with him from now, it has the appearance of payment for waiting, meaning that advancing the money to the laborer. In the latter clause, as the laborer works with him from now, it does not have the appearance of payment for waiting. V'im haya mechubar b'karka v'talosh kol shehu kana mishum v'talosh kol shehu kana amar sheshes hacham b'mayaskina damar lech yafei lecha karka kol shehu v'kanei kol ma she'aleha. The Mishnah teaches that if the flax was attached to the ground, and he detached any amount, a kolshu, any amount, he has acquired it. The Gemara asks, is it correct to say that due to the fact that he detached any amount, he acquired it? If he does not perform an act of acquisition with all the flax, how can he acquire all of it? Rav Sheshet said, here we are dealing with a case where the seller said to him, go and clear for yourself any amount of land and thereby acquire everything that is on it. When the buyer clears the land by detaching the flax from the ground, he is considered to be renting the land and thereby acquires all the flax that grows on it. That's the end of that. We're starting a new Mishnah. The new Mishnah states, Mocher Yayin V'Shemen L'Chavero. With regard to someone who sells food or drink, Yayin, wine, or oil, to his friend. Let's say he sells wine and oil to another, and the price rises or falls. Or Oshu Huzlu. Im ad shalonis malas amida l'mocher v'shinis l'mocher v'shinis malas amida l'lokeach v'im haya sar sur peinehen nishbara chavis nishbara lasar sur. Okay, so if someone sells wine or oil to another and the price rises or falls, and the buyer or the seller wishes to renege on the sale, if the price changed before the measuring vessel is filled, the merchandise still belongs to the seller, and he can cancel the sale. Once the measuring vessel is filled, the merchandise belongs to the buyer, and the buyer can no longer cancel the sale. And if there was a middleman, a sarsor, between them, and the barrel belonging to the middleman being used to measure the merchandise broke during the transaction, and the merchandise was ruined, it broke for the middleman, meaning he is responsible for the ruined merchandise. And the Mishnah teaches an additional halacha with regard to this, that anyone who sells wine, oil, or similar liquids is obligated, after he transfers the liquid into the buyer's vessel, to drip for him 3 extra drops from the measure. Hatiflo shlosh tipin, 3 drops. Harkina umatzeit harehu shamocher v'chenmi eno chayev latif shlosh tipin. Rabbi Yehuda Omer erev Shabbat im chashecha patur. Okay, anyone who sells wine, oil, or similar liquid is obligated, after the transfer liquid to the buyer's vessel, he has to drip for an extra 3 drops from the measure. After he drips those 3 drops, if he turned the barrel on its side and drained out the last bits of liquid it contained, this belongs to the seller, as he is not required to give these last drops to the buyer. And if the storekeeper is not obligated to drip the 3 drops because he's too busy to do this constantly, Yehuda says, if the sale occurs on Shabbat Eve, as nightfall arrives, one is exempt from dripping these 3 drops, as there is a need to complete the transaction before Shabbat begins. Starting the Gemara. Gemara says, Hamida zeman ilemad mida lokeach ad shlonis malas mida l'mocher mida lokeachi alamida democher shlonis malas mida lokeach mida democher he. The Gemara clarifies the Mishnah statement that the sale occurs once the measuring vessel is filled. This measuring vessel, to whom does it belong? If we say that the measuring vessel belongs to the buyer, why does the Mishnah teach that before the measuring vessel is filled, the merchandise still belongs to the seller? Since it is the measuring vessel of the buyer, he should acquire everything that is placed in his vessel, whether or not it is filled. But if we say that the measuring vessel belongs to the seller, why does the Mishnah teach that once the measuring vessel is filled, the merchandise belongs to the buyer? Since it is the measuring vessel of the seller, the merchandise has yet to enter the possession of the buyer. Amarabi Ila Bimidas Sarsur Hamadiktanu Sefa ואם היה סרסו ביניהם נשבר החביס נשבר הסרסו מכלל דרי שלה וסרסו עסקינן Reisha Mida below Sarsur Sefer. Sarsur Asma. Rav Ella says, Rav Ela said, the Mishnah is referring to a case where the measuring vessel belongs to the middleman. The middleman lends it to the seller. Once it's filled, it is loaned to the buyer so that he can transfer its contents into his vessels. The Gemara asks, but from the fact that the latter clause teaches, and if there was a middleman between them and the barrel broke, it broke for the middleman, it may be inferred that in the first clause we are not dealing with a middleman. The Gemara answers, the first clause addresses a measuring vessel belonging to a middleman without the presence of the middleman at the transaction, whereas the latter clause is concerned with a middleman himself, who is present at the sale and therefore accepts responsibility for the barrel and its contents. Here, kina umetsei tarehu shel mocher. Ki slak Rabbi Elazar eshkachei lezeiri amar le mi kan tana de asnei Rav Midos achave Rav Yitzchak bar Adimi amar le maika kashilach. The Mishnah teaches that if he turned a barrel on its side and drained out the last bits of liquid within it, this liquid belongs to the seller. The Gemara relates when Rabbi Elazar ascended from Babylonia to Israel, he found Ziri and said to him, "Who here is the Tana who taught Rav, whom Rav taught this halacha with regard to these measures?" Ziri showed him Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said to Rabbi Elazar, What is it about this halacha that possesses a difficulty for you? Rabbi Elazar said to him that the problem is that we learned in the Mishnah, if you turn the barrel on its side and drain out the last bits of liquid clean within it, that belongs to the seller.